Good morning, and thank you for joining us for Social Media's Impact on Youth Substance Use and Mental Health with Ricky Barton. This presentation was prepared for the Great Lakes PTTC under a cooperative agreement from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA. The opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of the speakers and do not reflect the official position of the Department of Health and Human Services. Couple of housekeeping items. If you have technical issues, please individually message me, Rebecca Buller, in the chat section, and I will do my best to be helpful. If you could please post your questions for Ricky in the Q&A section, not in the chat. We're going to be using the chat quite a bit today, and we don't want to lose your questions. So please use the Q&A, and we'll try to have time at the end of our presentation to answer your questions. If captions would be helpful, use your Zoom toolbar near the bottom of your screen and choose Live Transcript. AI note takers are not allowed, and we will be removing them from our webinar. And certificates of attendance will be sent via email to those who attend the session in full. Now I'm going to introduce Ricky. She has a passion for moving individuals and communities onward in their goals. She is the founder and lead consultant of Onward Consulting and is a certified prevention specialist.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks to the Great Lakes PTTC team. That was harder to say than I thought it would be, for having me on this webinar today. It is great to see so many of you on here. I'm seeing people from all over the place, and I'm just thrilled to see you. Also, I'm just going to ask you, go ahead. We are headed, it's Thursday. It is Friday Eve, my friends, and it is Friday Eve for a holiday weekend, a long weekend. Hopefully many of you have Monday off. I want you to go down to the very bottom of your screen where you see React, and I want you to choose the emoji that feels most fitting for you headed into this weekend. We're almost there. We're halfway through. Oh, I'm seeing them pour in. I'm seeing the hearts and the celebration cannons and the thumbs up. Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Great to see all of that excitement. I know I am very excited. Weather is going to be good, at least where I am going to be at. And so I am just so excited. Wonderful. Is it Wednesday? It is Wednesday. It's Thanks, Mackenzie. My days are all off. It's Friday Eve. Either way, we're headed into weekend. I'm apparently already there. You're so funny. It is Wednesday. No one be confused about that. Well, with that introduction and me not knowing dates, I'll go ahead and introduce myself just briefly. I know that Rebecca just gave you a little bit about me, but they've got a couple key points for you to just know about me. One is that I'm actually based in the beautiful city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I didn't see any Pennsylvania people in the chat, but if you're over there, please say hello. I would love to know that we've got some Pennsylvania folks joining. However, I will say I saw a lot of people. I saw a couple St. Louis that were popping up there. I'm actually lived in Springfield, Missouri for 12 years. And before that was in Lafayette, Louisiana. So I've done prevention work in all three states and just enjoy what I get to do. And now, of course, oh, there is someone from Pittsburgh. Great, 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 great. Love to see it. Love to see it. We've got an exciting couple weeks ahead of us as we start football season. We'll see what happens. A couple other things I just want to share about myself, just so you know. The first is I was just talking with Rebecca and Chris about this. I like to climb really big mountains. And this is one of those things where I do a lot of thinking while I'm hiking, which is where a lot of some of the research and things that I produce come from, is these long hikes. So that's me at Everest Base Camp about almost 2 years ago now, which is wild to think about. And then that's me at the top in the middle there at Kilimanjaro, the top of Kilimanjaro earlier this year. So just enjoy those big mountains, lots of time to think. I am also the proud owner. Yesterday was National Dog Day, and so proud owner of my rescue girl, Oreo. Yeah, she's pretty cute. I know you're saying aw behind the screen. Love that for you. She's a sweet girl, and we go on lots of different adventures together. But to connect this actually what we're talking about today, I want to just show you this picture, which is of me. I believe it or not, I am in that sea of young people. That is me speaking to a room full of about 350 young people in New Jersey. Was this event actually talking about this exact topic that brought us here today? That is social media and the influence and impact that it has on mental health and substance use for young people. Because this is a topic that I do train in both youth settings and adult settings, both with different landing points, both with different ways of communicating this message to those two audiences. But it's a vital message. And what I'll tell you is that when I first kind of had this thought, I was probably hiking a mountain somewhere. I kind of had this thought of like we all assume that there's a connection. We assume that social media has to have some sort of impact on mental health and how we feel about ourselves and maybe even substance use. But what does the research say about it? And I have been doing some work over the last several years. I've offered this training in multiple settings at multiple conferences because I find that people want to know about it. And the research that I've uncovered really does point to these connections. So today, what we're going to talk about is the facts of each of the three topics, if you will. We're going to talk about substance use in the US, we're going to talk about mental health with youth in the US, and we're going to talk about social media facts. And then we're going to kind of look at how they overlap with one another in the ways that all three of those pieces can create this dangerous, potentially harmful overlap zone for our young people, and then some things that we can do about it to make an impact and make a change. Now, I always start my presentation here with this fact, and that is that social media is not all bad. And I threw a meme on here because I like to laugh. I like to have a little bit of fun, and we've all been there where we had a phone call or a meeting that could have been answered or was answered in an email. So I love memes. I love reels. I think that that's just a way, the new love language. It's the sixth love language is communicating back and forth, sending reels and TikToks with one another. But social media, from that perspective, it's not all bad. It connects us. We are more connected than ever before because of this beautiful thing called the internet and social media. I told you about those mountains that I've climbed. I was able to come down off of Kilimanjaro and get on Instagram and tell my family that I made it, that I did it, that I was alive, that I was okay. I'm able to be around the world and communicate with people back home. Or maybe some of you have some loved ones that live far away and you're able to communicate with them because of this thing called social media. So we're very connected. It also makes us laugh to the point of memes and reels. There's lots of humor out there. Lots of people, my friend and I, we have a joke anytime, something funny comes up, we say the internet is undefeated. It's just undefeated in terms of what people can produce out there. It also introduces us to new perspectives and ideas. And many of you will recall back when we were assigned some sort of report in school, we had to go to the library and check out a book that was probably published years before that and use that information to write our report and gather all of that info. Today's day and age, we are able to access information within seconds on the internet. We are able to look something up really quickly and know the answer, know the variety of things and perspectives. Now, obviously, there's some cons that go with this information too. Sometimes there are things you may learn on the internet that you wish you hadn't learned. And there's several of those I could list. But the idea being that we have the ability to get more out there from the internet. It also provides support, and this kind of looks different for different people. I'll share with you, I'm also one of those sourdough girlies. I got hooked on the sourdough train and I make sourdough bread. So I follow people who also make sourdough, and that's a support for me and one of my hobbies. Connected to that, though, there's also supports that are for individuals who may be struggling. A lot of the social media platforms have algorithms that are looking for keywords, looking for key phrases, and it'll flag and say, hey, do you need assistance? And hey, this looks like you might be feeling down today. Here's the 988 number. Here's our counseling. I've seen in the group chat. Yeah, we got sourdough, we got moms groups. You can learn all kinds of things. My sister-in-law, she has chickens and she learns all about her chickens from people in groups. So much help, so much support. We can also be creative in different ways. Now, I'm not an artistic person by nature, but I like to make some funny reels and things here and there and share those with the world. Other people, able to share their artwork or just ways that they're able to be expressive online. And what's interesting, this is going to be a document that I will refer to a few times throughout today's presentation. The U.S. Surgeon General from the previous administration, Dr. Vivek Murthy, he released a report in 2023 on youth and social media. And this is a resource I will share with you at the end, so you'll have access to that. But one of the things that he discovered in his research was that young people who are marginalized or experiencing mental distress, social media can actually be very helpful, very important because of this connection, because of this support, because of the ability to have access to other viewpoints and see people that may be feeling the same way they are, and to help normalize some of those things. So this is important to note too, because as we're going to talk about some of this, we have to hold space for the fact that social media is not all bad. If it was bad, listen, we've got what, 300 people on this webinar right now. My guess is that probably at least 90% have social media. If it were bad, we would likely take it out of our lives. But many of us continue to use it. And so there's something good that draws us to that. So we need to hold space for that, because I think it's important that as adults, especially when we're communicating with young people, that we not come at those conversations from I didn't have social media when I was your age, I'm fine, you know, so it's the devil. We need to not come from that perspective. We need to acknowledge there are good parts to it. There are things about it that draw us to using it. And so starting there and holding space for that, I think, is important. Now, granted, the rest of our presentation is going to be talking about consequences, the consequences that exist from this online space. I'm going to start with just some general physical and kind of biological consequences that research is starting to point to. The first one is strain to the eyes and body. And I kept my phone here on purpose so that I can use this as an illustration. I don't know anyone who sits and uses their phone with perfect chiropractor approved posture, straight neck, straight spine. What do most of us do? We're hunched, we're leaning over, we're straining our bodies in this way. We're slouched on the couch, we're in bed. It's also straining our eyes. Until really the last, say, 15-ish years, we have not, as the human race, had a blow up, light up screen 6 inches from our face. This is a new thing that biologically our eyes are trying to figure out how to adjust to. So it's causing strain to our eyes to have this screen bright in our faces all the time. Connected to sleep deprivation, and this is because of a variety of different things. If we were honest, and you could probably use a little reaction emoji if you wanted to say this is me. We're up later than we think we should be because we're scrolling. Therefore, we lose sleep because of that. And I've absolutely been that person that I'm just in bed scrolling and I lose track of 30 minutes or an hour of time. I'm seeing the thumbs up, I'm seeing the claps. You know, we do it. This is just something that we often do. We're scrolling late. The other thing that might happen is we wake up in the middle of the night, we check our phone just to see what time it is, because that's our alarm clock these days. Well, all of a sudden I might see there's a notification. So I pick up that phone, I either read that text or I get on that social media app, and all of a sudden I'm scrolling again. So sleep deprivation, a pretty big thing that we're seeing there as well. Increased risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes, particularly for young people. Lack of movement, because of the gaming and the social media component of that. They're starting to study the brain and really what some of these things are having an impact on brain development. And early signs are showing that there's actually shrinking in the parts of the brain that do that cognitive processing, which connects to, as it says here, poor concentration, memory, impulse control, and things that, you know, especially for young people, which is our focus of the conversation today. They're meant to be in school. They're meant to be learning. They're developing critical thinking skills. They're meant to be remembering things. And so this is having an impact there. And connected to that, the delays in learning, specifically around language development. This needs to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt because, as some of you may be aware, if you are either around young people or you do research around this, we have a whole new language called brain rot. And this generation alpha that has been emerging, they've really developed their own language. And so some of this may be related to that. Some of it may be related to the fact that we are usually texting shorthand or using abbreviations, or we text less than we would say. So a little bit of a delay there in our language development. Connected to learning, this next slide I say with tongue in cheek because I did pull this picture from Facebook. So I found this image on social media, but what a teacher decided to do is they put a piece of big like flip chart paper at the front of the room. And she said, I want everybody to turn on your notification sounds. Anytime in the next 50-minute class period, that you have a notification go off, I want you to come up and put a hash mark on this sheet of paper, and we're going to see how many notifications came in one 50-minute class period. You ready? I'll show you. This is one 50-minute class period of yes, Abby already saw this. Yeah, it's just mind-blowing to me. So if you're looking at this, we've got Facebook on the top left, Snapchat top middle, email on the far right. All of the middle left is all text messages. Then we've got phone calls in the middle there, which has me scratching my head like, who's calling students in the middle of the day? And let's be real, the answer is probably you, the parent, the guardian. That's probably you making those phone calls. Instagram on the middle far right. Twitter or X is in the bottom left corner. Middle bottom is GroupMe or Discord, which is another messaging app. And then other on the bottom right, gaming apps, things like that. So we've got an issue here where we've got all of our students distracted. Now, one of the things that I will say to you, I'm going to put us as adults kind of, on blast, if you will, today too. I think that I would like to challenge you to put a sticky note next to your computer one day when you're sitting in the office on a typical old day. I want you to do this too. Just turn on your notifications, and every time something comes in, do a little hash mark. While it won't look like this because there's not 30 of you, I think it would be pretty eye-opening for you to see how many notifications come into your phone on a consistent basis. And of course, not all of this is social media, but many of those are. So connected to that, we understand that we have a draw to our devices. When we see notifications, there is something that draws us to either clearing that notification or looking at it or identifying it. And the individuals who are behind the phone functioning and behind these apps, they understand human psychology and human behavior. And in fact, they have figured out that we have this tendency towards addictive behaviors. And the apps are no different in this way than what we're seeing has happened historically with substance use. The image that you're looking at on your screen right now comes from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it's just a visual way to see how our body responds with dopamine, a very good feeling hormone, when things are happening. So that box with the blue and the smaller amount of orange dots that are on your screen right now, that's when you're having something food, like it's about lunchtime, maybe where you're at, maybe you're having a little snack while you're watching this. Your body's releasing that dopamine saying, hey, this is good for us, we should do this again sometime, I really like this eating thing, it's going to sustain me, give me energy, I like the taste, all of that. Okay, so our body releases that dopamine. The image to the right of that is what our brain is sort of representative of what our brain looks like with dopamine rushing our system with the introduction of cocaine into our body. So you see there's a flood of those orange bubbles, far more than the food, and that is the high that the individual desires and seeks with use. So that's sort of how we just at base level understand that our body responds with these hormones and feeling, hormones to substances. And what research is showing us is that it's the same exact dopamine release when it comes to our devices. As we get a notification, we get this rush. We want to look at it. It could be something good. Of course, if we're expecting something bad, there may be an anxiety increase there. We'll talk more about that when we get to mental health things. But there's an addiction to that process where we're really looking at connecting to our phones and wanting that piece of us to have access to the things that make us feel good. Connected to that, maybe you are realizing, and maybe, again, this is, I'm putting us on blast here. There's been times where I haven't heard or felt a vibration notification in a little while. I'll tap my phone just to check, just to look at it, see if there's something there. If there's not there, if it's not a notification there, I'll go ahead and I'll open it up. And I might open up Instagram just to sort of get that dopamine. I'm seeking that dopamine release. And when I've been on it long enough to where I say, okay, I've got my dopamine, that might be when I put that away. If I'm not like mentally conscious of it, that's actually our body craving this dopamine release cycle, and it floods our brains with those feel-good things. So I say this to say, really social media is creating an addictive cycle and pattern in the same way that substances had. Now we connect that to young people. Their brains are still developing. And just like we don't want our young people to have exposure to substances while their brains are developing because of the increased likelihood of addiction, social media is creating this same sort of cycle loop. And so we have to be mindful of the fact that our young people are becoming, their brain is developing around the release of these kind of dopamine receptors, which is why we see a lot of young people who are addicted to their gaming apps and addicted to their gaming consoles. And they need that because they're driven to that as their minds are sort of developing around access to it. So all that to say, I mentioned some good things. I mentioned some things that are a little bit dangerous. I'd be curious in the chat for you all just to sort of share with us. What impact have you seen in your life related to social media? And it could be good. It could be some of the things I mentioned earlier that are very positive, but it also could be some of the negative things. So I invite you go ahead in the chat and share some things. Connection with old friends. Great. I love that. Attention spans shortening. Yep. Distractions from real life. Nonstop media that can definitely impact and affect our mental health. Yep. Scrolling here. Low self-confidence because of that comparison piece. Yeah. Distractions. Lack of sleep. Losing time. Decreased interest in other things, gaming rage. Yeah, obsessive checking. So maybe you related to that where you're just constantly kind of tapping your phone to see if there's those notifications. Thank you so much. Yeah. Misinformation that we're coming across. Oh, yeah, relationships that may be exclusive just to online, so no face-to-face interaction. Artistic connections with people you don't know. Love that. That's great. So you see, if you're looking in the chat along with me, you see that there's pros and cons. There's things that are really beneficial and helpful to us. There's other things that are creating disconnection, creating harm, creating distraction. And so these are things that we need to be mindful of that as adults we're influenced by, and certainly so are young people. As we get into, I just saw that I like blocking people. I love that for you, Martha. That's great. So let's start talking about each of these individual things. Now, some of the information I share with you all may not be new to you, but I want to make sure that we communicate so that we're all on the same page of understanding some of the issues that we're seeing out there in the world. What you'll notice as I go throughout this part, really the rest of the presentation, I use these bubbles as a way of helping to guide you on what we're talking about. So you'll notice in the top right corner is a bubble with the topic, whether it's drug use, mental health, or social media. And that's just to help you know where we're at as we're talking through that. So hopefully that is helpful. Let's start with mental health. According to the newly released NSDUH data, or National Survey on Drug Use and Health, we have about 15.4% of our 12 to 17-year-olds in the US that will experience a major depressive disorder this year. That data also said that 20%, or 1 in 5, US high school students seriously considered suicide in that past year. 1 in 5. As you can see there, suicide is also the second leading cause of death for individuals 10 to 34. Second leading cause of death. So we have mental health crisis happening here in the US. We know that there is very much a connection of those individuals causing those situations causing illness, disability, cost of life, cost of and burden on society. We know that there is a lot of impact from our mental health. And so we hold this slide here, these statistics, very soberly. This is something that we need to be very mindful of, that a lot of our young people are struggling right now. And this is just a touch on the data. Of course, there's far more that we could get into. And I know many of you are from all over the place, so I couldn't get too specific on states. This is US data. But I'm sure you can access data in your area that would help you know exactly what's going on with your young people. But to make the point that many of them are struggling with mental health and with any consequences as a result of that, like suicide or self-harm. We'll shift to thinking about drug use. Again, this is national level data from that NISDA survey that was just released. 12 to 20-year-olds, as you all likely know, substance use under the age of 21 for both alcohol and nicotine, and most places that may have legalized cannabis use is under 21 as well. So looking at our 12 to 20-year-olds, 1 in 10 have used marijuana in the past month. A little more than that have used some sort of tobacco or vaping device. And I drilled down a little bit further there to say 1 in 10 have vaped nicotine specifically, because we now need to sort of differentiate what they're vaping. 4.3% used tobacco products of some type that's not vaping devices, and then 13% used alcohol in the past month. I just leave this little mark here about brain science just to remind you of what we already looked at. That slide that had the image of the dopamine in it. 90% of adults who have a substance use disorder started before the age of 18. We have to do work around drug prevention because the brain is so susceptible to the development of a dependency or an addiction to a substance, a drug, when it's in these early stages of development up until the age of 25. So the work that we're doing in the prevention field matters very much, both for mental health and suicide work, as well as the substance use issues that we have going on. I mentioned some of you may already know some of these statistics walking into this webinar, so I just have that one slide on mental health and one on drug use. I have a few I want to show you on social media because this might be really the peak interest here is maybe thinking about our social media connection. Half of the world's population has a social media account. 82% of American adults, 30 and younger, have social media, but here's the kicker, and this is why I put it in a different color and bolded it. 95% of our teenagers have a social media account. 40% of our 8 to 12-year-olds have a social media account. Almost half, 8 out of 10 of our 8 to 12-year-olds have social media. I don't know who might be aware of this. Legally, they have to be 13 to have a social media account. Anyone before the age of 13 is lying because you have to confirm that you are the age of 13 when you create an account. But listen to me, my friends, almost half of our young people, I said 8 out of 10, 4 out of 10. I can do math, I promise. I'm having trouble with days in math today, but 4 out of 10 of our 8 to 12-year-olds have some form of a social media account. This actually terrifies me, truly. If you want Ricky's anecdotal commentary, this is very scary. And for many of the reasons that we are about to get into, but one of the topics I also speak on is online exploitation or sextortion. And so the availability and accessibility of 8 to 12-year-olds to some of that explicit content very much concerns me. So the average age of when a young person opens a social media account is 12 and a half, which again is a step back from that 13 that it's supposed to be. This next slide was actually a survey done with teenagers over in Long Island, New York, and they reported the amount of time that they spent out of school. Social networking came in third. So in some positive light, the majority of their time was doing homework and studying. So that's wonderful. The second one was spending time with parents and family. Again, really great here. But right below that was social networking on TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, and whatever else might come along that's a new and popular one. So we see that a lot of young people's time is being spent here on this social media. And speaking of time, I told you all as adults, I'm just gonna put some information out there about us too, because the more we know, the better we can make choices. US adults will spend about 44 years of our lives staring at screens. That's sobering to me. That's a long time. It's a long time. About 4 to 6 hours a day on our smartphones. And I think this is actually pretty low, the 2 hours and 14 minutes. And I'm going to show you all in just a second how you can look up your time if you haven't yet. But the US teen will spend 9 hours a day looking at screens. And you can see there the breakdown between videos and playing games. And I really want to call your attention to the 3.5 hours a day on social media. Hold that statistic in your mind. I'm going to come back to that in just a little bit. but we've got teenagers spending about 3.5 hours a day on social media. If you are interested in finding out your number, I encourage you, go ahead and do this and then drop your number of hours in the chat. I would be just very curious to see. So if you've got an Android, you can go to your settings, the digital well-being, and the parental controls and show your data. If you are on an iPhone, screen time and see all activities, what's your average time? Let's see here. Dropping some in the chat. I see a 2, and it's so interesting. The comment about the 7 to 8 hours, when we're supposed to be working. All right, we're seeing them drop in 2.5, 4, 10. Okay, 3.5, 3.5. Higher than you'd like to admit. 10 hours and 45 minutes. 1 hour and 25. Okay, 6.5. Yep, I'm seeing some of you express disdain for the numbers that you're seeing, disappointed in yourself. 49 minutes. Okay, that's pretty low. That's great. 4 hours and 26, 7 hours. Yeah, I know. Some of this is super eye-opening, right? Like this is a wild activity to do because it really does raise your awareness of how much time you're spending. And of course, if you're in that app right now looking at that, you can see that I'm an iPhone user, so I assume Android works the same, but it shows you on each app how much time you're spending and what devices and which, email and chats and things like that you're going into. So yeah, this is really eye-opening for us as adults to see how much of our days are going away. In fact, I read a statistic, I don't think I put it on the slide, but that since 2012, we have spent an extra 50 minutes a day on average on our phones. An extra 50 minutes a day in the last 13 years. My friends, in the last 13 years, we did not switch to a 25-hour day. We are still on a 24-hour day. So we've lost an entire hour to these devices. It's eye-opening to me. All right. So let's look at this from a youth perspective. This is data that when I present this to youth, before I even show them this slide, I put up a Mentimeter and I ask for them to give me their favorite apps, the ones that they're on the most, and they align pretty well with this, but I'll tell you some differences. So the top there, you see the top apps used by the top number of youth: YouTube, TikTok, Spotify. Now, these are apps. This specific research asked for apps. So that's where Spotify shows up on this list because many of them listen to music or podcasts. And so when I talk about social media, they say, let's kick Spotify off there and let's put Snapchat there. Now, I don't know if you saw the news, but Spotify actually just added a chat feature. So for those of you who are parents of young people, this is another thing you want to be monitoring is the chats in Spotify. If you're a person who checks your young person's phone or you're having those conversations with them, an important thing for you to take a look at there. So just a note. Why, Rhonda? I don't know. Then the top number of apps that are used by the most minutes by young people. TikTok's number 1, YouTube's number 2, Roblox is number 3. Roblox is a gaming app, but it also has a chat feature. It's also got a social element to it. And most young people agree with this. However, Roblox I find is more of a younger middle school type thing. When I present this with high schoolers, again, they're usually replacing that third one with Snapchat. But this goes back to the slide 2 slides ago. If you recall, we talked about 3+ hours of watching videos. Well, that's what they're doing on TikTok and YouTube. They're watching those videos. So that's where that comes in. Discord, I see that in the chat there. Discord is just a communication app. It's just like a texting app. So that doesn't usually fall high on the list of the top ones used in terms of social media. Not to say they're not using it, but usually Snapchat is the top one when it comes to young people using it for chatting with one another. All right. That ends our brief walkthroughs, just some of the general data around these top 3. But now what I want to talk about is this intersection, the place that they all overlap, because this is where we start to see this dangerous intersection starting to happen. Get here. Okay, there we go. So as I said, remember, you can follow on the top of what intersections we're looking at. This one's drug use and mental health specifically. Generally speaking, there's 2 main ways we see this intersection coming through. The first is that individuals are using substances to cope with mental illnesses, with mental challenges, with feeling at stress, anxiety, depression. But as a reminder, substance use, especially in the young developing brain, can actually change brain structure. And so this is very dangerous here because any use of coping in order to cope with those feelings, I'm going to drink before I go out with my friends so I can feel normal, cope with social anxiety. I feel depressed, so I'm going to drink or have a substance. These are the things that could create a lot of problem and a lot of issue here because the brain is learning how to wire these feelings along with this substance. Excuse me. The second way we see this overlap happening is that use of substances can actually lead to the development of mental health symptoms, including things like depression, anxiety, aggression, hallucinations. There's a longitudinal study that shows that heavy and consistent use of cannabis in adolescence increases the likelihood of the development of schizophrenia in the 20s, in the 20s, early 20s, mid 20s. And so there's a direct correlation there that research is showing between using substances and then the development of some mental health challenges and issues. The next 3 slides I've got for you, I'm going to show you some data that I've pulled together from different states and then as well as the United States to show this overlap of drug use and mental health. The first is from Missouri. I told you all I lived in Missouri for 12 years, and so I was very familiar with their data sets. This was from their student survey, and the number of Missouri students who reported seriously considering suicide were far more likely to use substances than their peers who did not seriously consider suicide. To the tune of individuals who reported seriously considering suicide in the last year were 3.2 times more likely to use alcohol. They were 3.4 times more likely to use marijuana, and they were 12 times more likely to misuse prescription drugs. So again, a direct overlap here between use of substances and mental health challenges. Pennsylvania, which is now where I reside, similar statistic, although we're looking at students who reported high depressive symptoms, they were also more likely to use substances, 3.8 times more likely to use alcohol, 8 times more likely to use marijuana, and 11.7 times more likely to use cigarettes compared to their peers who were not experiencing high depressive symptoms. Then in the US, with 12 to 17-year-olds, those who had a past year of major depressive episodes were, again, more likely to binge alcohol. You can see the rates there. Use marijuana, tobacco or vaping nicotine, and opioid use. This came from that NISDA data that I mentioned earlier. So this is a direct data set that helps us to see this connection between those who are experiencing depressive episodes or seriously considering suicide being far more likely to use the main substances that young people use. This data is old, and I've struggled to find new data that specifically I've researched and found it. If anyone has access, I would take it. But this data is a little bit old, but it just speaks to the connection between suicides, those who do die by suicide, and having a substance in their system at their time of death. And so you can look through these percentages, but it just goes to show that there is that connection of using a substance while so depressed or so upset that they're considering suicide, that leading to the attempt and the death by suicide and finding the substance in their system. All right. So with that, we've got our considerations of overlap between drug use and mental health. The next one is drug use and social media. There are a few things I want to say about this. Columbia University did a study that found that simply having a social media account as a young person made them 5 times more likely to buy cigarettes, 3 times more likely to drink, and 2 times more likely to use marijuana. So when I say that, what I'm saying is this research just said, hey, do you have a social media account? Not, are you looking for a dealer? Are you watching videos on how to light a blunt? Are you trying to figure out how to mix drinks? None of that. It was just the fact that they had a social media account, which connects to this next piece of study that said that 75% of teens who saw substance use happening in social media accounts made them more likely to want to try it. This is likely not a surprise to you. If you work in the prevention field, we know advertisements play a huge role. Several years ago, the Juul vape company had to go through a huge lawsuit because all of their marketing was poppy colors with young people who looked hip and trendy. They were marketing to young people. We know that there's a connection between things being seen and marketed towards and us wanting to have that behavior. Again, I'll put myself on blast this time. I scroll my Instagram and the ads that pop up are targeted to me. They know my interests and I'm buying things that I don't need. I didn't even think about wanting, but all of a sudden I want it. When you have things put in front of you, you're more likely to have that interest in buying it. So we're seeing the same behavior with adults, but of course we know that young people, especially with substances, there's that drive and that interest in it, in seeing that. With our social media accounts, we also are aware that young people are actually accessing their substances through social media connections. From what I understand with talking with young people across the US, most teenagers would be able to tell you the name of the Snapchat account in your area that is the Snapchat account to go to if you need pills, if you need weed, if you need drinks. They're willing to do that. And so then they're meeting up with that person to get that substance, or it's mailed to their house, or it's dropped off at their house somewhere. So young people are using this to access their substances. And of course, one of the major risks here, especially if you're talking about substances that can be laced, like a pill or like marijuana, where they're laced with something super deadly like fentanyl, and maybe they're not aware of that. Social media, I mentioned earlier, kind of the exposure to seeing young people drinking online. This next piece talks about the idea of advertisements that could be out there. One of the things that really opened my eyes, I recently watched the documentary called Can't Look Away. And it's all about the lawsuits that various families across the US have against Meta and against Snapchat and against TikTok for deaths of young people, whether it's through overdose because they got pills on Snapchat or it's because of the mental health stuff that was going on. That documentary really brought to light the fact that you and I as adults, like let's just say you're a 35-year-old adult, what you're getting on your Instagram, on your TikTok is completely different from what a young person is getting, a 16-year-old. And there was a kind of a whistleblower from TikTok who he was in charge of marketing over in Germany. And in this documentary, he explains that he was made aware of how the youth are experiencing social media accounts differently than adults. So he went ahead and he created an account as a 15 or 16-year-old on TikTok. And he set his phone to screen record and he just started scrolling. He didn't search for anything on his new TikTok account. He just was scrolling the videos. He wanted to know how long it would take for there to either be a drug reference or mental health and to go dark. And it took 50 minutes of just scrolling on this account for it to become sexually explicit, for it to involve drug use, and for it to look very, very dark mentally. So that just goes to say, like, I'm not getting those kinds of things when I'm on my apps. That's not what I see because that's not what's being targeted toward me. We know that the advertisements make a big difference on what we're seeing. When the algorithm is pushing those harmful things out there to us, it encourages that behavior, whether that is substance use or whether that is really terrible thoughts about self or others. So there's these connections that are happening there between what they're seeing in these apps and what that's doing to their substance use, but also to move to the next connection, their mental health. To sort of summarize a lot of research that's out there, we know there's a connection between social media and increased anxiety, increased depression, increased loneliness, increased hopelessness. Because of the phones in general, we have reduced face-to-face contact. Unless people are really intentional these days to put their phone down and have that eye-to-eye contact or side-by-side conversation going for a walk, we have a reduced face-to-face contact. And that actually increases our isolation and our feeling of loneliness, even though we are, as I said earlier, the most connected generation of mankind to exist. we still are very isolated. We still feel very lonely because while we can hop on there and maybe chat with someone there, we might actually find that that doesn't fulfill us the way that face-to-face, eye-to-eye contact does. This is more of an anecdotal thing that just happened in the last little bit. While I'll talk about AI for a second in just a few slides, I do just want to make this point that a lot of people have developed relationships with AI chatbots, whether romantic or platonic. And AI is under a lot of fire right now for some of the things that have been allowed. But specifically, ChatGPT 5 just came out in the last week. And part of that, they completely revamped the way that their AI chatbots are communicating with people. Where people were feeling like they were married to their AI bot or they were in a very serious relationship, the AI communicator started saying, hey, I can no longer communicate with you like this. I encourage you to go and get connected with people who are close to you, your family and your friends, and rely on them. I can now only answer, very straightforward with you and all of this. So there are things that we need to be mindful of that are happening with people online, but young people specifically, that potentially they're developing relationships with people that have now been yanked from them in a good way, in the sense that, that may not have been a healthy relationship. There are a lot of stories across the US of young people who have died by suicide because of AI chatbots encouraging them to do so. But we also need to be mindful that their mental health is going to be affected by those relationships being taken away if that's the way AI is going. So I know that that's a lot to think about there, but just make a note to yourself to keep tabs on the AI chatbots and what that's doing for mental health with young people, because that's a pretty new and emerging thing. Like this just happened last week. So be mindful of that in that way. Many of you in the chat, when I talked about ways that it's affected your life, social media, you said comparison. You said that you're feeling the effects of comparison, maybe lower self-esteem in yourself because of that comparison. We're seeing that with young people as well. And FOMO, fear of missing out. They see what other people are doing. So-and-so got invited to the party. I didn't get invited to the party. Oh, my friends are out doing this fun thing this weekend and I'm home because I'm grounded, or I'm home because my family's doing, and that can create some mental health stress. It's an older study at this point too, 7 years ago, but British study tied social media use. I already mentioned this, the decrease in sleep, but that's associated, especially with young people, with increased depression, memory loss, and poor academic performance. So again, these things that are impacting our mental health with this substance use. Continuing this intersection of social media and mental health, cyberbullying is at an all-time high. I would again challenge us as adults to do better, because we're actually some of the worst bullies online. The comments that we're making in chats and the things that we're saying online, we're modeling for young people. So we need to be better, but also that young people are bullying. And if any of you have seen this, it's a little bit, I think it came out earlier this year, I don't quite remember, but the show Adolescence on Netflix, while I hesitate to recommend it strongly because it does contain very, very intense content, it speaks to the idea of cyberbullying, how that led to a very violent act between two young people because of the cyberbullying that was happening, when from the outside, an adult would not have known, really, unless they were aware of the emojis being used and all of that. So we also need to be very mindful of the cyberbullying and look for ways that we might see that popping up and impacting our young people. I told you to hold a statistic in the back of your mind earlier on social media, and that is that young people are spending about 3.5 hours a day on social media. I'm bringing that back here now, because that same article I mentioned earlier by Dr. Vivek Murthy, who is the former US Surgeon General, he found that youth who spend over 3 hours a day on social media are 2 times as more likely to have an experience in poor mental health outcomes. And the majority of our youth are spending 3.5 hours a day. So they fit in this statistic where they're twice as likely to experience those poor mental health outcomes. A lot of hate-based content that they're seeing online. And I mentioned earlier kind of some of the algorithm stuff, excuse me, that might be coming through. But the truth is that the algorithms they're tracking what you're interested in, they're tracking what you're watching as a very, benign example. I had a friend once who sent me an AI video of it's like a baby. It was a scene from a movie, but AI created it with like two little babies talking. It was super cute and it was super funny. Because I watched that, now all of a sudden my For You page has a whole bunch of AI babies acting out scenes from movies, or Elvis singing, or Sinatra. They're cute, but I never followed an account that has AI babies doing movie scenes. It's just that because I saw that, now the algorithm all of a sudden thinks that I want to engage with that. That's a cute example of the algorithm thinking it knows what I want. However, we're also seeing very dangerous things happen with the algorithm. And I give an example here of like, maybe a young person searches healthy eating because they want to make the wrestling team, or they want to be the best, fit athlete or whatever. And so they research that, and the algorithm pushes out content to them that they think is truth, but it actually is behaviors that glorify and mimic an eating disorder. So this can be really, really dangerous. And many of you mentioned misinformation in the chat too, where there's false news or misinformation that's shared. But without that critical thinking skill, which young people are still in the process of developing, they may not understand that that's not truth. And so we have to be mindful of that as well, that algorithms are sending information to us all the time. There are ways to reset your algorithm. We'll talk about some of that in just a little bit. But again, I'm making the point here that what we see on our apps is not what young people see on theirs. And having conversations with young people about what they're seeing and experiencing is really important. I've mentioned Dr. Vivek Murthy a few times. Well, this is him. He did an op-ed piece back in 2023, I believe, right when his report released. He did an op-ed piece where he suggested that social media needs to have some form of a warning label, just like cigarettes and nicotine products do, that they cause cancer, just like alcohol does, that you should not drink if you are pregnant. He's suggesting that we have found enough evidence to substantiate warning labels for social media. Now, we'll talk about this more later a little bit too, but one state so far has actually passed a law that will require their users to acknowledge the risks of social media before they use it every time, and another state's following closely behind. But to that point, I think that this just helps us to know. This is from someone who holds a very high office in the health field in the United States. He felt very strongly about social media. Continuing in this connection between social media and mental health, research has also found not just being on social media has an influence on our mental health, but the longer we spend on social media in a given time, the worse our mental health. So it's one thing to spend 10, 15 minutes, but as I spend 30, 60, 90 minutes, I am likely to feel more anxious, more isolated, more depressed, more hopeless. One of the things that I encourage young people to do is, as they're on their devices, is to every once in a while just do a body scan. How am I feeling in my physical body? Because our body is usually the first thing to tell us what's going on. Are my shoulders tight? Was I not breathing deeply? Am I slouching? Does my stomach kind of feel a little anxious? What are the things that my body's telling me about my space right now online? And is it time to put this device away? Because the longer we spend, the worse it is for us. Any human, if you're someone who says that doesn't really impact me, I'm going to argue that it probably does in some way. We're always impacted by other people's opinions, other people's thoughts, and that connects a lot to our online space with likes, with shares, with comments. We're comparing. Hey, if I post something out there, is it good content? If I post a reel on my Instagram and I don't get, a bunch of likes on it, I might think, oh, maybe that wasn't as funny as I thought it was. Maybe that wasn't as great as I anticipated or as profound. I post a story. If people aren't hearting it, I'm like, well, man, I kind of wish I hadn't posted that now. We're impacted by these things, and that might make me feel less than if my content is not as good, or I'm comparing myself to another content creator. To be clear, I am not a content creator. I am not an influencer on any social media app, but just even the development. I've got a nephew who creates YouTube videos where he splices together different athletes, kind of major highlights. And he's always looking for likes and followers and subscribers. And I can tell that it impacts him. He's always asking me how many Instagram followers I have. I said, buddy, I've had Instagram a lot longer than you. Like I've got more time on this. So it's okay if you're not at my number, that's okay. You don't need to have a certain number, but he's comparing himself to his peers and to me. And so I think that we've got to be mindful that young people are also impacted by that. We may think it's silly as adults, but to them, this is a lot of what they desire to have as followers and subscribers, and they want maybe even take money off of that. I know that I've got one of my closest friends, her daughter makes money off of YouTube. She's got almost 450,000 subscribers. She makes money off of YouTube every month. A lot of young people see that and they think, oh, well, I want to make some money. And so they try to get this, they're driven towards that. I already mentioned the bullying and the cyberbullying that can happen here. The other interesting thing that I personally am keeping tabs on because I'm intrigued by it, they're starting to look at how the brain is impacted by the filters and the angles that are often used in social media, and whether or not that's distorting reality for a developing brain. Hear me say, they're not proposing that the silly Snapchat filters with the dog ears and the tongue, or cat ears or whatever, they're not saying that young people think that's reality. But they are looking at beautification filters or things that make us look like we are thinner or have makeup on or not. It is, and even the angle that we're taking things at, it's distorting our perception of what real life looks like. If all my wrinkles go away, and I think that I just look such smooth skin, but then as people meet me in real life, there might be some disconnect there. And so they're looking at how that might be actually confusing reality and distorting reality for young people. And connected to that, this is where I told you I would touch on AI just briefly. There's a lot more to be said on AI, but we don't have time. But again, I found this on Facebook. This was probably, a year and a half ago or so. And I noticed that this one picture kept popping up on my Facebook feed. People were sharing this picture left and right, and they were like, oh my gosh, it's a picture of a baby peacock. And people were like, look at how beautiful this is. Oh my gosh, the brilliant colors. Oh, it's so beautiful. So they were sharing this picture. And you can be like, oh, that's a pretty cute peacock. Like, that's pretty adorable. Like that's cute. My little critical brain over here was like, okay, I would not be a full-fledged adult in this life without knowing that that's what a baby peacock looked like. Like someone would have known that. We all would have baby peacocks if they looked like this, So I'm over here like, all right, quick, 2 seconds over to the Google search engine. And I type in baby peacock, my friends. This is what a baby peacock looks like. Okay, he's still cute. He's still cute, right? But he's brown. He doesn't have brilliant blue eyes. He doesn't have brilliant blues and greens on his feathers. Nope, he's brown and very plain looking. Now it's kind of like, hey, buddy, don't worry. You're going to get beautiful. Don't worry. Hang tight. You'll get there. But to be honest, this is kind of an ugly little bird, and I would not have ever guessed that's what a baby peacock looked like. But my point here is this. We as adults were all duped by this baby peacock. And young people are actually pretty good at identifying AI, but AI is getting so much better. I know like there's lots of jokes going around the last year of, AI pictures with people with like, 6, 8, 10 fingers on one hand and, the weird things that are happening there with AI that it wasn't able to keep up, but it's getting better. AI gets smarter every day. And so we have to be mindful of what AI is doing in terms of what it's communicating about reality. And that the risk that poses to us as society as a whole, but also to young people, and maybe their understanding or distortion of what's real, and them believing that because they're seeing this on YouTube or they're seeing it on TikTok, and so therefore they're interpreting that as real. Anyway, a lot more to be said about that, but we'll pull up anchor here and look at some signs to look for real quick, and then I want to get into some solutions and leave some time for questions at the very end, because I think there's some coming in to the Q&A. So This is not an exhaustive list of signs to look for by any stretch of the means, okay? This is just some generalized signs that you can look for. If you've got young people in your life, this may be where you see some of the overlap and the intersection happening here. If you see lots of cell phone use, if you see breakdown in relationships where maybe they're isolating themselves, they're not hanging out with the friends they used to, or potentially they've just like walked away from things they were interested in. Some of this could look like teenagers just developing, like upset, withdrawn. But if you're particularly seeing a change in their behavior, especially after using their phones or texting, this could be a sign that there's some impact happening there. So keep these in mind as we talk through some of these solutions. I hope that you're starting to think through not only in your personal life, but your professional life too, ways that these things could kind of make a difference and how we can intersect them. Because this is my point. We've got to do something here. It's now is the time. Probably years ago was the time, but if not, then we've got to start doing something now. Because the truth of the matter is, phones, social media, AI, it's not going anywhere. This is now part of the human experience. I mean, they're starting to develop the glasses, y'all, where we will no longer have phones on us. It will all be AI through glasses that we wear. I mean, the future's coming very, very fast. And so we've got to have strategies now that help us become healthy examples for young people and help guide young people to good decisions and help address some of the things that are creating problems here. I pulled my solutions from a couple sources. So first is just prevention science in general, which I will touch on briefly, but again, I could unpack it in a whole nother webinar. Also, these are two of the documents that I pulled a lot of ideas and research from. So the second one here, that is a document released July of last year, so a little over a year ago. The Biden-Harris administration put together a task force. And I believe it was literally called the Task Force on Online Health and Safety for Children and Youth. And they put together this guide. It's about 127 pages. So it's dense, it's rich with content. And it has in there lots of the facts and statistics I talked about, but also best practices for families. And I'll share some of those resources as we go along here, but a family media campaign, a family media plan, like how to handle media in your home, a conversation talking points to have with young people, really great document there. And then the number 3 on this list is that Dr. Murthy's released report back in 2023 that I've pulled some information from. That one's more like 30 pages, a little bit more easily digestible. And then also different research that I've pulled together, and I've got sources at the very end for you. So prevention science, if this flower is not familiar to you, this is called the Strategic Prevention Framework. And this is the framework that we use all across the world, really, to do prevention work in communities, to change communities with the problems they're seeing with substances. My argument here in this webinar is that this same framework applies to this intersection we're seeing between social media, drug use, and mental health. We follow the same process of conducting an assessment, looking at who's using social media the most. What are the apps they're using? How long are they spending on the apps? Which subpopulations are experiencing the biggest risk or problems from their use online? Does data already exist? And I would encourage you to look at your student surveys that might be happening in your state. And if your student survey does not ask about social media usage, time spent on phones, watching videos, all of that, I really encourage you to try to add those the next time those are collected. I know in the state of Missouri, they are adding those to their Missouri Student Survey offerings as a list of options to ask for the school districts in 2026. And I just think the more data we have around this issue, the better we're going to be able to drive our decisions, because that's really what prevention science is based on. Our assessment helps us to determine the problem, and then what's called the root causes or the risk and protective factors that are contributing to that problem. And then we know what to do about it. Then we know how we can create solutions around it. But speaking of risk and protective factors, I'll just talk briefly about them and then give you some examples. So risk factors are things that put an individual at higher risk of either a behavior or a consequence or a problem. So in prevention, we have a host of evidence-based risk factors that we know put young people at higher risk of using. That could be things like having a rebellious nature, like kind of as an intrinsic, you're maybe a little more rebellious, a little more willing to be risk-taking. Could also be something like a low perception of harm. If I don't think that drinking alcohol is going to harm me, I'm more likely to use. Availability, if I'm able to access alcohol, then I'm more likely to use. Doesn't mean that I will, it's not causal, but if I know where to get it and I don't think it's very harmful, I'm more likely to use. On the flip side of this balance is protective factors. I like to call it bubble wrap. It's like bubble wrapping our young people with things that mitigate or offset the impact of those risk factors. So protective factors are the things that reduce the risk of a certain behavior or the consequences of such, because there's something that enhance the good and positive things in our lives. So that could be the presence of one trusted adult. Research shows over and over again that that's one of the biggest protective factors we can have, is for young people to have a trusted adult in their life that they can talk to without repercussions and have that support. Having an opportunity to get involved in things like prevention work or schools or school sports, theaters, things along those lines, all of that plays a role as a protective factor. So there's a lot of research that's gone into these, and there's a whole list of risk and protective factors that influence substance use. I pulled from that list some of the ones that I think apply to this intersection. And I'll ask you to sort of like preemptively give you a heads up in the chat. I'm going to ask you to share what risk or protective factors you think you see at this intersection also. So get ready or start populating the chat with those. These are just some of the ones that I came up with. So certainly that rebelliousness. If I'm more likely to sort of break rules or stretch bounds, I may be more likely to have a social media account where I'm out there looking at things that I shouldn't be looking at, and maybe looking up substance use and things along those lines. Family management problems. When we talk about some of the solutions in a minute, you will see that there's some chatter about how important it is to have conversations in your home about social media use, to have certain expectations around social media use. So all of these things, I think, play a major role in that risk factor, along with family conflict. If a family's having conflict, I may be more likely to go to my device. I don't want to hear my parents fighting again. I don't want to hear them yelling at my sibling again. So I'm just going to go to my phone and I'm going to sort of process there with people who are on there, or I'm going to look up things that will hopefully get me that good feeling. Just like with alcohol, I mentioned earlier, the more available or accessible social media is. So students having phones, students having the social media apps makes that accessibility higher, puts them at higher risk of some of these impacts. And of course, norms. And that's for us as adults and for youth. If we're always on our phones around them, we're modeling for them that it's very normal behavior. And so we're thinking about those norms. Crossing the line into protective factors that influence here, things like resiliency. If I'm a young person and I just have a general sense of resiliency, I can work through hard things and get through tough stuff and make it out okay. If I've got that, that's a protective factor for me. I might be able to see content online and think, that doesn't affect me. That doesn't impact me. I'm not choosing that anyway. Bonding, talked about that trusted adult, bonding within the community, bonding with friends, bonding with parents, bonding with other trusted adults, all protective factors. I mentioned being involved, pro-social involvement, recognition for positive behavior, whether that's from individuals at school, at home, in the neighborhood. These serve as protective factors. So let me just check the chat here, see what some people are tossing out here. So interestingly enough, yeah, that family conflict may result in divorce itself. That could sometimes in some homes actually be a positive thing if there's a lot of issues going on. But if there's a lot of conflict and divorce solves that, that could certainly be an impact there. Seeing low self-esteem, if they tend to be more of a follower. Yep. That trusted adult. Good. I'm seeing lots of great things added here. Yes, protective factor of knowing their values. Religion and spirituality is a huge protective factor. Research shows over and over again, doesn't really matter what religion. Just the fact that you've got some sort of belief system is a protective factor. ACEs and PACEs. Yeah, thank you for all those. Yeah, great. So in thinking through some of the ways that we can bring solutions to this. This is kind of where we're going to land the plane, and then we'll open up for some questions. Reducing risk factors and enhancing or building protective factors. My number one urge to you is to be a trusted adult that they can talk to about what they're experiencing online without repercussions, without getting in trouble, just how to spot someone who's unsafe, maybe someone who might be offering substances, someone who may be, encouraging unhealthy behaviors, how to get out of uncomfortable situations. We teach refusal skills for substance use. Let's teach refusal skills when someone's trying to have conversations with us online that are not healthy. My encouragement is to use current news stories as a way and a springboard for that. Hey, I heard that, a parent is suing ChatGPT because their son died by suicide because of this chatbot. Did you hear about that? What do you think about that? What do you experience when you're online? Do you have anybody that's telling you things that are negative like that? Those conversations are huge to have with young people, just to start that process and show them you're a safe person to think through these things with. Second idea here, which is an encouragement for you as adults and for young people. Set limits for yourselves on your phones. I'm an advocate for no cell phone usage after 10 p.m. I know some homes, they turn off their Wi-Fi. And so if the device is not a cell tower based device, then that would shut off the internet, or phones being charged out in the kitchen, or, wherever. Different rules that could help maybe reduce that use late at night. Our parents' old adage used to be, nothing good happens after 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. Kind of same idea applies here. Nothing good happens on the internet after 10 p.m. Again, that's not research-based. That's just more of an expectation or an encouragement of a limit to set for ourselves. Different apps allow you to set either a timer or an alert that when you've reached an amount of time that day on that app. So for those of you who were maybe a little shocked by your number of hours, maybe go to those apps that are taking up most of your time and say, hey, I only want to spend an hour on Instagram every day. You usually can still work around that, which I've done before. Absolutely. The little marker comes up, hey, you've spent an hour. And I'm like, well, I'm about to spend another hour, snooze. But, I say that to say awareness is everything. So if we're just at least aware that we've been on it for an hour, that might help change and dictate our behavior. I mentioned very early on in this webinar, the strain to the eyes and the body. Just changing your phone from light mode to dark mode is huge for your eyes. Now, I just sort of, if someone hands me a phone that isn't in dark mode, my eyes are just like, oh, it's so aggressive, because everything's in dark mode in my phone now. And I absolutely love that. I think that's helped my eyes a lot. Okay, so a few more recommendations here. I already talked about being that trusted adult, asking questions about what's trending. What are they seeing online? How is online affecting your mental health? How do you feel when you're on your phone for a while? I've already mentioned us as adults setting our own boundaries here, teaching those refusal skills. This next slide has a lot of words on it. I'm just going to warn you, it's got a lot of words. These come directly from that guide that I already told you about, and I've got a QR code for it at the very end. So you don't need to memorize all this or look at all this. I just put some of the ones on there that I liked the most. First one, I know social media is important to you. I wanted to check in about it. How do you think things are going with your social media use? Open up a conversation with the young people. Another one that I really liked on here, because I've actually got a friend who did this with her son. Let's talk about gaming. I'd like to share a few things I've noticed about your gaming behaviors and then hear from you. I want to get on the same page about this, because what she noticed was when he came away from playing Fortnite, he would come out of his room for dinner. He would be aggressive. He would be moody. He would snap at his sister. And so she was tired of seeing that, tired of family dinner being a frustrating time for everybody because he was coming off of a gaming app. And so they had that conversation where she wanted to get on the same page. Another one there in the middle is about maybe what you're seeing with your algorithm. Do you need help resetting your algorithm? Let's work together to get that to happen. I think these are really good and healthy conversations to have with young people. I mentioned that There are some strategies within that same guide that offers like a family media plan. And so I've got that QR code that will take you to ways to download a document that you can create your own family media plan. And again, some of this advice just comes directly from that document to make sure that you're on the same page as your young people. Everybody in the household is trying to improve and get healthier in their online space. Couple more suggestions that come from this. Make it a low drama conversation. The minute anything gets a little emotional or hyped, probably just hit pause, because we don't want to create an environment with young people where this becomes contentious, where this becomes a issue of, especially teenagers. If we're talking about younger students like 8, 12, then there may be more of like a rule abiding kind of thing, conversation that's happening. But with young people, we're trying to help them learn those critical thinking skills and to evaluate and assess what's happening in their own lives and how this is impacting them so they can make decisions for themselves about it. So we want to make sure that these conversations we have are really promoting that kind of autonomy, because that's what they're learning in that developmental stage to begin with. So again, lots of ways here that we can be promoting good, healthy behaviors. And I know you all have the slides, so you can always refer back to these. This slide is all about the recommendations that came from that document for the industry and policies that could be passed to protect our young people in a better way. A few of them that we'll mention here. So banning targeted ads. You remember I talked about how ads are different for that young person than me. I think that this is a pretty decent idea, that no one under the age of 16 should be targeted with any sort of advertisement for any sort of product. And it just feels like that's probably a developmentally appropriate thing to do. Again, that's a Ricky Barton opinion, but that's just one suggestion, one recommendation that came from this document. Some way we've got to keep those under 13 off the platform. If you remember that statistic I shared, 40% of 8 to 12-year-olds have a social media account. We can find a way to do that. Now, that kind of comes hand in hand with a bigger conversation about how do we do account verification. Are all of us supposed to upload a government issued ID with our birth date and our information on it? A lot of people are not going to be comfortable with that. So there's got to be some sort of conversation around that, but they're working towards how to do so. Algorithmic transparency. And I'll talk about this more, Senator Hawley's bill that passed in a minute. But the idea here being that we've got to know and understand and be able to have some sort of say about what the algorithm is sending us. The fact that we are actually the product that these companies are using to sort of test and to throw things out to, we're the ones that are the test subjects here, with what the algorithm is sending to us. So some sort of transparency and regulation around that. I mentioned AI. We've got to get ethics around AI. We've got to get some rules around this, because I didn't even talk about the online exploitation, sextortion piece here, but just understanding that deep fakes are created, that can create a lot of issue, a lot of havoc, that can lead to suicide, that can lead to a lot of mental health issues. But just around AI and ethics around things that can be created there, very much needed. There's some talk about maybe those under the age of 18 have to have a private account, which of course would influence and impact people like my friend's daughter, who's making money as a 16-year-old off YouTube because she has a public account. So that's a consideration, but something certainly that's been recommended. And then my favorite from this list is requiring media literacy training in schools. This is something that I think is needed now more than ever. It was always a good idea, but to me, this is really important. In the same way that our students have to learn about the Civil War or learn about algebra or whatever, they need to learn how to be safe online, how to identify things online. I think this is huge. And so I am all for policies that would require media literacy in schools. Now, I mentioned Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri. He actually worked with as a bipartisan bill that passed last August called the Kids Online Safety Act. And you can go and look up KOSA more specifically later, but essentially what it did is it forced social media companies to start to regulate the content that they've, as it says, deemed harmful to minors, and specifically looked at how to protect their information, addictive product features, how to disable those, algorithmic recommendations that are personalized to that young people. So this is the start of some really good policy here. We've got to continue this. We've got to make sure that we are continuing to push these things that would create a safety net for our young people in this online space. And I mentioned earlier, Minnesota was the state that is now requiring the governor pass a bill. And as long as there's no legal things that happen between now and next July, if you live in Minnesota, starting next July, you'll have to mark yes on a warning label that, yes, I understand the risks of being on social media, that it could be hazardous to my health, and then you can go onto your app. New York is following closely behind with a law that is very similar. So things are happening in terms of trying to build protections around our online space. It's just that we've got to continue educating ourselves through webinars like this, through our own research. And I've got some research to show you, some resources to show you in just a second. Before I get there, though, my key here is this: the solution is connection and protection. We need to connect with the young people in our lives in a face-to-face way, in a genuine way, where we're having conversations with them about this space. And in that, providing protective factors, providing ourselves as a safe, trusted adult, providing opportunities for positive belonging, providing feedback for good behavior. All of those things are part of the solutions that we can have here. Now, I promised you some resources. This QR code will take you to SAMHSA's online safety website, which has a lot of the resources on there. But just so you know, on the left is that one document that's from the Biden-Harris administration's task force. The one on the right is Dr. Vivek Murthy's from 2023. So I'll leave this up for just a second if you want to scan the QR code. But I also know you all have access to the slides, and I know Rebecca is going to send a follow-up email with a bunch of resources, and that's what I'll show you right now. These links are coming to you, so don't feel like you've got to jot them down or anything like that. These are just going to be there for you. I like to just show them. I've got your family media plan on here. I've got some policy reform things. There's actual curriculum that's emerging and developing for teachers, for young people, for parents. So these are some of the guides that are out there to help with that process. I'll go ahead and put up my questions slide, and we will take some time for questions. I know you've got the slides, so you'll see my sources in a little bit, but I wanted to pop up my email address so that you all can connect with me if you need to. And I will switch over to the Q&A here because we've got about 8 minutes left for questions. All right, let's see here. I see one from Nikki. Is the depressive symptoms that cause the use of substances, or the use of substances that cause depressive symptoms? So the truth is, research shows it's going both ways. That individuals who may be feeling depressive symptoms may use substances to cope with those depressive symptoms. But on the flip side, the use of substances may actually lead to the development of depressive symptoms. So it is kind of a back and forth. It could go either way, of course, depending on the individual and the circumstance, but it could be both. All right, perfect. Let's see. Work with foster kiddos who came into the system due to parental drug use. How much more likely are they to abuse substances due to their parental? So family substance use, whether that's parental or close family knit, is a known and established risk factor for young people to use. So many of our prevention interventions that are on the selective level are meant to help young people who may have a family history of substance use, current or past, to strengthen their skills and their resolve to not use. And a lot of those programs are around that. So there is absolutely a connection to them being more at risk. Now, I don't have a number for you, but I would say that there's research that shows that that's absolutely connected. Great. All right. Working through this. I think that I'm doing this correctly, Chris. All right. Videos from the students themselves saying out loud why they were doing these behaviors. I'm not sure necessarily, Salvador, which things at what point you asked this question about what behaviors you're talking about. So maybe a little bit of clarity would be helpful on that. However, I will just say I don't necessarily have student testimony of their space online. What I can tell you is when I have presented this to young people, they're connecting with this information. I've gone to school districts and presented this to all 11th graders, to all 7th graders, I mean, across the board. And the feedback that I get is that they see the impact it's having on their lives. They see it and they know it. The younger Gen Zs and the newer Gen Alphas seem to be a little bit more cognizant of that impact and they want to make a difference. But they also realize and are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place because that's also where their peers are. So it's tough for them to want to have that balance in their lives, but also they see the impact there from their online space. So again, not knowing exactly what you were talking about in the moment you sent that question, I hope that I answered that. That young people are saying that this connects. Okay, perfect. I see it in the chat. Let's see. Jess, I'm wondering if maybe one of the Chris or Rebecca grabs yours. Let's see. U.S. Surgeon General study from 2023. Yep. Did it control for socio? You know what? I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to reread that document to find out whether or not socioeconomic status was considered as a control factor. I do not know the answer to that. So I apologize, but I do think that's a very curious question. There could be an impact there if it wasn't controlled for. So definitely of interest. Thanks for asking that, Alex. And I encourage you to read that too, just to see if that document did. Okay, research where first introduction of drug use with parent in the home. I think what that question is asking is what does the research say about when a young person is exposed to substances in the home as their first use? Just like I answered the other question, when there's parental or familial use of substances, that does put that person at higher risk. It also has higher risk because of availability. If the substance is in the home, then a young person is at higher risk of using that. So I would say that there is research to show there is a connection that they're at higher risk of use when it's in the home and when the parent is the one that is using. That also contributes to another known risk factor where parents have a low perception of wrongness, that youth perceive that their parents don't think it's very wrong. So multiple risk factors playing a role there. And again, hopefully I answered that in the way that you were meaning to. All right. Well, I will go ahead and stop share now because I think our PTTC team has a few things to say in closing. I got through all those questions, but thank you for joining me today. I love this conversation, so I'd love to hear more about anything that you all are doing in your space around this as well. Go ahead, Chris.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ricky. What a fantastic webinar with so much incredibly valuable information. I'm seeing lots of applause and hearts coming up. I just really appreciate how clearly you laid out all that information to us. So thank you. I appreciate you so much. And I do want to make sure everybody is aware of a few upcoming events that we have. One is if you are working on becoming a certified prevention specialist, join us for training by Nicole Augustine on September 4th, preparing for the prevention exam. We have an asynchronous moderated online course for ethics coming up in September. This is limited to just Region 5 substance misuse prevention folks. We have about 10 slots left. So if you're interested in taking this, apply right away. We have what we call a Change Leader Academy, and it's going to be focused on lead with confidence in times of change. And actually, I forgot, I put here the deadline has passed. So just wanted you to know if you're going online that's why you can't register at this point. We have a full crowd for that already. And then advanced prevention. If you have been working in the substance misuse prevention field for 5+ years and are interested in talking about youth cannabis use, we hope you'll join us on September 17th. And then last but not least, we have had a learning collaborative this year as well as last year for prevention certification for those folks who are wanting to work together as a group with other folks to get that peer support of working through that process The applications are currently open for our next learning collaborative. So if you are working in Region 5 and interested in that, we hope you'll apply. And want to make sure the social media training, we've got our social media. This would be a good use, right, Ricky? Good use of social media. This is the way we get information to you all on a daily basis, so right away. And so if you aren't following us already, we'd love to have you follow us if you're so inclined. You will be redirected at the end of this webinar as we close out to our GIPRA survey. Please let us know what worked well for you in this, what could have been done differently to make it even better. Please know I read every single comment that's written, so it does not go into a black hole. So please take the time to do that. Rebecca put a link in the chat, and also you will be redirected at the close of the webinar. So again, thank you to Ricky. Thank you to all of you for your active participation. A huge thank you to Rebecca, who works on the back end for us of getting everything set up and technology-wise and everything else, lots of things involved. And also she gets the recording up for you all afterwards. So huge thank you to Rebecca. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care, everyone.